Hello and welcome to 24 Lives Per Second, Guernsey's only and therefore bestest ever movie podcast. We're slightly reduced this week. It's just me, Winter Tyson, and Russell Kellaway.
Hello.
Claire's on holiday. And we're also reviewing slightly fewer films than usual. We've been to see Lincoln. We haven't seen Zero Dark Thirty yet. We'll deal with that next time. We've also seen Lawless and the Sweeney, both at home to rent, or you know what I mean. Anyway, it's a bit ramshackle. Let's start off with Steven Spielberg's epic Lincoln.
How can I hold that all men are created equal when here before me stands stinking the moral carcass of the gentleman from Ohio, proof that some men are inferior, endowed by their maker with dim wits, impermeable to reason, with cold, pallid slime in their veins instead of hot red blood. You are more reptile than man, George, so low and flat that the foot of man is incapable of crushing you. How dare you!
Steven Spielberg's Lincoln focuses on the tooled president's attempt to get his 13th Amendment passed in the dying days of the American Civil War. It focuses on rivalries within and without the party. It focuses on relationships with his son. It focuses on a whole load of stuff. I gotta say, I didn't really like it. Russ, what? Tell me why Lincoln's a good film.
So yeah, this would be a good one. I did like it, you see.
Cool.
Why is it a good film? I mean, a couple of reasons why is it a good film, really. I mean, I think it's expertly made. I mean, I think, Spielberg sometimes doesn't get his dues for kind of, how good a director he is. Why is that funny? You're laughing. Dues.
Schindler's List.
Schindler's List. Okay.
That's really bad taste. Sorry, there's another connotation to that.
That's fine.
Anyway, moving on.
That's fine. I think his last film was War Horse, that although many people didn't like, and I didn't actually see, a lot of people did still say it was a very good-looking film, and in many respects. So that's good to see that he's kind of back on the horse, if you will.
Hey.
Terrible. Another reason why it's very good is I kind of went in there not knowing much about that period, knowing how the general plot was flowing in terms of his 13th Amendment to abolish slavery going through, but didn't know kind of much about how that happened and the whole scuffle and everything kind of that goes with it. And so I did kind of come out of it feeling like I learnt something, which I don't think happens very often. I think often you go into films and you kind of sit there and you watch them and they just kind of go over your head, and you may talk about them, but you haven't actually learned anything about kind of history or how things happened. And so that was good. Another point why it's very good is a bit of a yawn, but Daniel Day-Lewis I thought very good, for a great performance in what is basically a talking role. It's just talking all the way through. There's no action in this film. For him, it is. I mean, there's no action really in general. It is 100% almost 2.5 hours worth of talking, and I would imagine that might be a lot of people's kind of problem with it. This isn't the most exciting film, but I think there's enough drama in it to really kind of carry you through. I think Sally Field was very good playing what could have been, quite an annoying role, but she kind of managed to get across, both her problems as Abraham Lincoln's wife, and kind of the impact she was having on his life. It's also got an amazing kind of ensemble cast. Actually, it's got James Spader, it's got
Jogo.
Jogo. It's got Tim Blake Nelson. It's got John Hawkes. Tommy Lee Jones. All these kind of brilliant actors in it. All kind of getting a good amount of screen time and all kind of being very good in it. Even Jackie Earle Haley turns up. Rorschach's in there somehow doing what he does best, looking a bit dodgy and not being particularly well liked. I think there's many reasons to like it. I went in there thinking, how many times am I going to look at my watch in this film? And I have to admit that I didn't look at it. I wasn't bored throughout it at all. So I thought it was great. I thought it was very good. Why did you not?
I just felt, it's such a massive idea to make a film about Lincoln. I mean, he's so sort of iconic a figure, but it's almost as if you can't look at him straight on. So I think Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter did this really interesting thing where it said, this guy might as well be a cartoon character. And that's what they did with Lincoln. And they had a great sort of analogy for the, as unsubtle as it was, analogy for what slavery is, which is a consumption of other people. And they made it sort of literal. And it was great fun. And you kind of thought, okay, that's an interesting take on this. And it's funny and it's witty, etc. Whereas this one, I kind of felt, I learned a lot of facts about Lincoln and about the era that I didn't know about, especially about sort of the messiness of the end of the Civil War and the reasons why Lincoln wanted to get this amendment passed and why his the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't the fix-all they thought it would be, and all that stuff is really interesting. But I could read that on the Wikipedia page, and this being a movie, it's probably about the same level of reliability, I think. But interesting enough. But it also has these things about. There's an interesting current about to get this thing done, we really have to get some underhand in this scene. So James Spader, Tim Blake Nelson, John Hawkes are these guys who are essentially brought in to rig the vote by bribing people to cajole, and they're told they're not allowed to mention the president's name. They're basically giving out jobs for votes because they've realised there's a lot of Democratic senators who haven't been re-elected. Mm-hmm. They've got nothing to lose. They just want something to do in the future. And that's a really interesting story about how far do you go to do how much of a bad thing do you do to do the right thing, which I'm sure we'll touch on with the subtleties of the Sweeney later. But the film's not really about that. It's then got this interesting subplot about Lincoln himself being sort of almost a brick wall of a man. He's got his stories, he's got his sayings, and what's quite interesting about the portrayal was, for as much as he rambles as an individual on these stories, his speeches are always very succinct and sort of to the point, which is great. But it's not really about that. It's based on a book called I think it's Cabinet of Rivals, and I haven't read the book, so I'm not going to pretend I have. But I did see the author interviewed ages ago, and she said the interesting thing about Lincoln was he brought in the best people, not necessarily the people who agreed with him. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But it's not about his cabinet. It's not about the internal fight. It's also not about his son desperately wanting to fight out of a sense of honour and shame and stuff, but Lincoln not letting him as commander-in-chief. And there's all this stuff going on, but it's not really about any of those things. So there's a lot of it. And Daniel Day-Lewis, he's good, but Lincoln's almost like kind of a... what's the guy called? The old guy from the old curiosity shop. I've forgotten. It's like an old Dickens character. He's kind of like these characters. You know what they are. Martin Clunes or David Jason's going to play him. They're going to do it perfectly well. And that's kind of how Day-Lewis plays Lincoln, because you can't do anything with it. You can't. I mean, when Anthony Hopkins played Nixon, it was a very different performance to when Philip Baker Hall played him in Secret Honor. Yeah. And that gave you a kind of a different insight into Nixon's personality. Whereas this, it just kind of like went, that's Abraham Lincoln. Okay, this is what happened at the time. That's interesting. Oh, that's what happened with the Southern generals at the end of the war. That's great. That's interesting about his son. But the film wasn't about anything. I just get the feeling this is a film that was made because Spielberg said, I think there should be a big film about Lincoln. And didn't really nail down, and as well made as it is, as well acted as it is, and there's some great dialogue. There are individual scenes, such as when they're arguing about why the amendment needs to go through, scenes between him and his wife, scenes with Thaddeus Stone, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, a very principled man having to kind of check his principles in
order to the greater good in all this.
But again, it's that idea, how far do you go, personally and professionally, to bring about something that is good? Do you take a step back from your absolute convictions to do that, which is fine. But it just didn't really... I got to the end of it and I thought, I cannot figure out why the film was made, apart from Spielberg went, I should make a Lincoln film.
Yeah, but I would argue that that's what a lot of directors do. I want to make a film about that, so I do it.
I know. They want to make a film about a story. Why does Spielberg want to make a film about Lincoln? Is it because he should? Because there was I was told about an article where he said it's the first time he wore a shirt and tie every day on set. Mm-hmm. I thought, shoot yourself now if you can't. Do you know what I mean, though? Because I like the good thing about the Vampire Hunter one was it played with our ideas of what Lincoln is, kind of very like literally, but it also played with that whole idea. Like if you if you look at Soderbergh's films about Che Guevara, there's a guy who is literally a poster image to many people, but you don't really know much about what he did, which made the films very interesting. It peeled away that poster and said, here's what he actually did, and some of it was good, some of it was bad, and there's all sorts of shades in there. Whereas with Lincoln, you went, oh yeah, he did that. oh, but I don't know. I don't really know why. I mean, there's a bit about, oh, I saw the slave barges, which is fine, but that's like a sentence in the middle of 2.5 hours. You don't. Why was this Lincoln's fight? Where did that come from? Did it come from his parent? Did it come from just? You didn't even get a sense of righteousness. You just got this idea of a man. I mean, I'm always trying to avoid saying about things I hear in other reviews.
Yeah.
But I think Kermode sort of, even though he quite liked the film, he hit upon a very good point when this Lincoln felt like something chiselled out of rock. And to have someone chiselled out of rock as your main sort of character doesn't really... I just felt it could have done with being a film about Lincoln's son, or about someone or about the three characters who were brought in to do the shady deals, with Lincoln, this Lincoln person sort of looming over them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point in terms of him being, kind of cut out of rock, and I think that is very much how he's portrayed. He kind of, he talks about how he can't let his emotions come through about his son because he has to hold it together, and I almost think that from, to take the rock analogy, further, is that I think it's the cracks that do show in the film that are the interesting points. I think it could have been a different film, that really went into those, but like you said, the thing that hit me about the film was how wrong what they're doing is. What they are doing is basically rigging a vote, through fair means or foul for kind of it to happen. And, and that, you can just sit there and the ease at which it happens and how naturally it all comes, it says quite a lot to me. And also, like you said, those little glimpses of him saying, I cannot be like that because I have to be like this in order for it to operate. I mean, in terms of, why he was doing it, I mean, I see it almost, to take the word you use, it's just a righteous thing in general. It's a freedom thing, isn't it? I think to search, I didn't have to search further than that to kind of find a reason for doing it. Obviously coming from the point of view that it was the right thing to do anyway.
Mean, let's say if you were, I mean, you said there was like a 12-year-old at the cinema when you saw it. If you were 12 or 13, you didn't really know much about slavery. You didn't really know much about Lincoln or sort of the history of America at the time. Would you have come away from this film thinking, gosh, that's a really important story? I'm not sure you would have. And that's what, what struck me about it.
I would have thought if I was that age, the film would have lost me 40 minutes in. to be honest with you, I think at that age it's probably quite boring. And like I say, I mean, I went to see it with my wife. She wasn't a big fan of it. She didn't really get carried a lot along with it as much. She also doesn't buy into the whole Daniel Day-Lewis thing as much as maybe I do. Okay. I'm a big fan of his work. I think he's very good. And I think, if some people go, oh, Daniel Day-Lewis again, he's going to win an Oscar, so what? And you can discount him. But I think he is, me and you were talking about Leonardo DiCaprio earlier on today. And, I think Daniel Day-Lewis is someone that every time you see him on screen is 100% different, and you could take away the makeup, take away the costume. It's the physicality, it's the walk, it's the voice, it's everything. And I think that's what he has, and he's such a kind of engrossing actor that I was really happy to sit there and just spend that time with him, kind of putting that performance in, and that's what invested me into it. And so I think it's an interesting film, and I think it will win a lot of awards. It already has, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great film. Like you say, I think Spielberg made it because he wanted to make a film about Lincoln. I think that's it. I think he's got a great affinity for the man and a great love of the character he could put on screen.
But but watching it, I wouldn't come away and say, right, okay, I see why Spielberg had to make this film about Lincoln. I see what it is in Lincoln that he connects with, rather than, Kennedy or George Washington. I see why that man and that film. I don't. I know it's a hard one because it is technically a very good film. I mean, some of the scenes are quite poorly written, I think. But I can't decide if that's actual bad writing or has the truth become the cliche sort of stuff.
Right,
because I mean, Lincoln sits around telling stories. That's his whole character, is this guy who recounts stories. And it's fascinating, but for 2.5 hours, you're kind of thinking, oh. But, I mean, I will say, I would advise people to go and watch it, because I think people, if you're in the right frame of mind, I think you would enjoy it. I think James Spader is just...
It's excellent.
He's
amazing,
absolutely fantastic.
So good.
I'd love to see, like, a film or a TV series about those three characters and their sort of... I think there's a TV series to be made about the sort of political murkiness of that time. Yeah. Spader's just... Because he's been on the... he applied for Michael Scott's job in the American Office,
Right.
and they've left it as a cliffhanger. It's him and like Ray Romano is just
Right,
awful.
okay.
But he came in and just
Blew
he
it
came
away.
in playing some kind of slightly mysterious, absolutely steadfast. he said to one of the other characters, "I know you." He goes, "You couldn't possibly know me. I've looked you up and down. I know you." And Spader does this stuff with his eyes closed,
Yeah.
and he's fantastic. And I think those three characters bring a lot of lightness to what is quite a heavy film. I just felt there were 5 or 6 stories that I just thinking, I'd love to see that story. What is the deal with him and his son fully explored? I'd love to see this side of it. I'd love to see those 2 soldiers at the start. Why are these 2 guys stood? Because this was a time when even a lot of people fighting for the freedom of slaves still, thought niggers were terrible.
Yeah.
Sorry, pardon me, but to use the language they'd have used, people still hated black people, and that's not really addressed too much in the film. I don't know. I would recommend it, but only because I'd be fascinated to see if people like it or not.
Oh, good. Well, I would recommend it because I liked it.
That's fair enough.
But that's
and
fine.
Talking about people who got shot in the face, we'll be reviewing 0 Dark 30 next week once we've seen it, which is the Osama bin Laden SEAL Team 6 movie. We haven't had time this week because
We're busy people.
there's only so many films to watch, and if I can watch The Fugitive again, why not? Anyway, moving on now to home video. Lawless. This is John Hillcoat's film. John Hillcoat, of course, made The Proposition and The Road. It's about some bootleggers in 1930s Appalachia. It's focusing on 3 brothers who were Howard, Forrest, and Shia LaBeouf. I can't remember his character's name. Essentially, the family is famous within the region in which they live for being bootleggers. There's also a bit of a myth going around that they're immortal. This is proper kind of genre filmmaking, I think. Guy Pearce is in it. Tom Hardy plays the oldest of the brothers. Jason Clarke, who was in the severely cancelled too early The Chicago Code, plays the middle brother Howard. It's also got, who else is in it? There were loads
Jessica
of them.
Chastain.
Jessica Chastain's in it, and there was someone else. Guy Pearce. Anyway, there's loads of people in it. What do you think of it, Russ? What do you?
It's great. Coming from someone who...
Gary Oldman. Sorry.
Well, it's funny how you
Gary
forget.
Oldman.
Well, because he doesn't do much. It's very strange.
he's just a character,
which is really interesting. He's just a character in this film. Just no grandstanding, no real huge violence or anything from him. He's just another guy in the background doing his thing. So that was interesting. Gary Oldman. Who's he? But having been a massive fan of The Proposition, more so than The Road, but still enjoyed The Road. But The Proposition, John Hillcoat's kind of breakout, where he came from, is a fantastic film. Ray Winston, How the Mighty Have Fallen. So I was I've been wanting to see Lawless for at least 6 months, kind of when it came out in the cinema. We didn't get it over here, so couldn't go and see it. But like I say, it came out, I think, last week on DVD. If you know how his films tend to look, you won't be surprised. They do have that same kind of very, very golden yellow kind of hue, kind of saturated kind of look, and this one looks the same. And they're beautiful films to look at. And what he normally does is he managed to mix kind of great performances with some really quite striking violence, but he always gets a really good story in there as well. And so that's why he manages to get away with it. I think this does have some real moments of real horrid violence in it, actually, but it's always done in that way that's often the best way, which is it's horrid. It's not glamorized. It's not let's pump people full of bullets and they do what they want. The violence has consequences. Well, in this film, in a different kind of way, I suppose, because like you said, there is that really with a lot of his films, there's always that slightly air of the magical or something about them. And like I say, that very strange rumor of these boys being immortal, but it kind of permeates through the film.
I was finding with this and like The Proposition, you can almost see the legends that these events will spring off, and sort of the fables and whatnot. Yeah,
certainly, and so that he's always just got those extra few layers which make his films really interesting. Tom Hardy continues his run as a really imposing presence. Without, I couldn't understand him for quite a lot of it, actually. his accent, he's doing another Bane, but his kind of southern accent is so deep and kind of baritone bassy that you kind of, but you didn't need to because it was all about actions. Shia LaBeouf, who normally I dislike immensely, was actually very good in this. I think he funnily enough, he plays well when he's playing annoying characters, because I think
Yeah,
I find
yeah.
him quite annoying. And here, playing the youngest brother, who, you know, if you know anything about this type of genre of film, the youngest brother who wants to take on, you know, become the big brother and kind of, you know, take on a bit more responsibility, what's going to possibly happen there, you know, that kind of kicks in. And then Guy Pearce comes in with another typically unnerving and strange
Very odd
performance, you know, showing a kind of a different kind of malice to what we're used to from him, where he's got this very strange haircut and kind of everything going down with it. So a great cast. Jessica Chastain as well, brilliant, you know, excellent. I'm yet to see her do anything but brilliant work.
No, yeah.
And from what everyone's saying, kind of, you know, Dear Zero Dark 30 is quite similar. So yeah, it's great. I mean, both me and my wife sat down and watched it, and both really enjoyed it. It's a great film, which is, like I say, really interesting and different, and manages to talk about a period that's been talked about loads and loads of times. You know, especially in something like Boardwalk Empire, that's recently kind of been doing things. It fits in with that quite nicely, but it's different from that at the same time. It's not all gangsters and their moles.
This is sort of like the back room story
yeah,
of
exactly.
that,
This is
isn't
the
it?
source. This is where it all comes from.
Because these are the guys who are brewing the booze and sort of up in
exactly.
the mountains and so on. And I find him very interesting films. This, I mean, just like The Proposition, is written by Nick Cave. And he tends to write these films that they sort of verge on this sort of mythic kind of plane, but they also very solid films. And I mean, Russ has already mentioned the violence here, but my word, some of it is it's a very strong film. I describe the violence as strong. It's never gratuitous.
No.
But there are some things in this film that will probably
make you wince.
Some people might even say, I almost can't watch this. But the violence is never over the top. But like you say, it's grungy, and it looks like it would hurt as much as it should hurt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think all the acting was just really strong. I found the story to it is essentially, you know, there's a justice of the peace or some political sort of localish bigwig who wants to bring together all the bootleggers into one kind of union. Of course, he gets his payoff and so on and so forth. And it's really about that idea of kind of you're taking away the freedom of what people are up to. And that's not to say that he romanticizes these guys at all, because they're really quite nasty, and there's some real kind of horribleness. So you don't ever think, oh, that what a scamps. They're not like Robin Hood characters. They're criminals.
No. Yeah.
And they profit from their criminality and so on. I just thought it's really rare to see an 18 rated film that is just very solid, very kind of very evenly staged. I thought. I mean, especially with. I mean, I keep saying about the violence, but what was striking about it was I watched. Well, we're going to get onto Sweeney in a minute, which is a 15. Now, I'd say there's one of those films is very unpleasant,
and one of them is very troubling.
Yeah, and the other one isn't, and it's you know, it's not the 18 rated one. But no, I would thoroughly recommend Lawless to anyone. The soundtrack's fantastic. It's got a couple. It's got two brilliant covers of White Light, White Heat. One's by one of the guys who did something on the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack, You're in That Kind of Country, and the other one's by the Bootleggers, who is Nick Cave and his mates in disguise, as you might expect. But I just really like the fact I don't like The Road very much, but I think it's a solid film.
I think The Road's the weakest of the
this
three.
This is another very solid film from John Hillcoat, and I'm just, you know, I'll watch anything the guy does, because it's always going to be interesting. Anyway, we've mentioned it a few times. I'm not sure if we've really hinted at what we think of what's coming next, but there's Sweeney. You slag, you nonce. I'm gonna sort of almost excuse myself from this review, because I started watching the Sweeney. I got 25 minutes in, and when he tells there's a internal affairs police officer, and Ray Winston playing Regan, the role essayed by John Thor, I suppose, which was a load of rubbish back then as well. And he says to Stephen McIntosh's internal affairs guy, "We do the things that you wish you could do." And all I could think was, no, you don't, because he's a policeman.
Yeah.
And you're a bunch of arseholes. I mean, you watched the whole thing, Russ. Did it redeem itself? I bet it did.
No, it didn't redeem itself at all. I mean, I found it properly offensive about 30 seconds in. The first note I wrote on it was, it's offensive after 30 seconds, when all these guys, the Sweeney, I've never quite understood why it's called the Sweeney, to be honest with you. Do you know why it's called the Sweeney?
It's because they're not nonces. I
No,
don't know.
obviously. They're all sat in a car on the way to some, heist or something.
God,
and they're talking about this guy's fiance or fiance to be, and they're saying, is she a 9 or a 5? And he says, oh no, you either want to get with a 7 or a 3. An absolute shitter, I think he says. And I'm sat there just going, sorry, are you kidding? Then it flashed up, directed by Nick Love, and I went, directed by Nick Love, of course. And the only saving grace in this film is that Danny Dyer isn't in it. That's it. Yeah. That's the only positive.
See, I did have high hopes because that opening shot, there's an opening shot of London and it looks like LA. And I mean, Nick Love, he produced Bronson, which is a really good film, and etc., etc. But it takes about 30 seconds. You think, it's like a child writing a film.
That's what it is. And I think the problem is that basically all he did, or his vision for this film, what he thought he was making was heat in London. He thought, I am Michael Mann. I've got the night shots, the blue tinge. I've got a shootout which takes place in broad daylight through a congested city. I've got all this stuff, and it's going to be heat. That's what it is. And it's just, he can't rein himself in that much to be able to bring off something that's got a little bit of class. And that's his problem. He's got no class. And it's trying so hard to be modern, and yet these guys are walking around going, you slag. And you're like, no one says you slag anymore. I was surprised that Ray Winston didn't say who's the daddy, because that's the mode he's in.
Right, yeah, okay.
And so that was just kind of, I don't know how long you want me to slag it off for, because I can keep going. Ben Drew, who is Plan B, who plays the Carter character, he has the emotional range of a sponge and delivers all his lines in some kind of strange, slightly husky, monotone robot voice, which I didn't quite understand. And then you're supposed to then believe that Ray Winston has quite a healthy sex appeal to a younger, quite attractive woman, and because he's boffing some lady.
That's Hayley Atwell, isn't it?
It is Hayley Atwell,
who,
funnily enough, is married to the Internal Affairs man, which is all very, very sweet. Both of them are. It's such a weird film, and it's got such an obvious plot that's signposted every single step of the way. Like, what's going to happen. And to watch it, my two biggest problems with it is, one, it was all over the place. I keep forgetting that you haven't actually seen it all. So Ray Winston, there might be a few spoilers here, but seriously, don't worry. He's obviously a policeman. Then he gets told he's not a policeman anymore because he goes and does this, and his actions end up getting someone killed, and nothing ever happens to him. I mean, he gets put in prison for like 2 days, then he's out of prison, and he gets beaten up while he's in there because he's
Sweeney.
They put him in general population because they're getting him back. It's all bit underhand, a bit
the
dark.
world's against the violent.
Yeah, and so
criminal.
he's in prison, he's out of prison, he is a policeman, he's not a policeman, he gets a fake ID, he shoots a guy in the hand when he's not a policeman, and you're like, and then at the end, it's all fine. No biggie. Don't you worry. You come back, and he's like, I'm back, boys. I'm back, fellas. And you're like, hang on a second. He needs to be at least investigated by somebody. Because it's just like he's the world's naughtiest policeman.
But the thing is you don't run around hitting people with baseball bats,
no.
which apparently is all right.
That's the other thing, was policemen with baseball bats, and it's like it tried so hard to set itself in today's world that I don't see how they could have it, or they can't have it all. They can't say this is really modern, up to date version of the Sweeney, but we can still do all that, because it wouldn't happen.
I think he was trying to be something like The Shield.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, The Shield was one of those programs. It was kind of like a guilty pleasure version of The Wire in some ways, because it was about a bunch of policemen, and they were set up essentially to do what the Sweeney do, which is to go around and fight the vicious gang culture in LA. But I mean, part of the reason The Shield worked was because in LA you do have this Bloods and Crips. You do have automatic weapons on the streets and stuff, and policemen do carry, normal policemen carry guns and have to essentially be in open warfare. Like if you watch something like End of Watch, I think what was really interesting was just the day-to-day warfare of being a policeman. And those characters as well, they were quite they were quite sort of I suppose heightened in a certain way, but the Sweeney didn't seem to be doing that. I mean, I'll tell you the point I turned it off. They went to see this bank, right, and they were like, oh, look at the security in this bank. It's Ray Winston and Ben Drew, and they were chatting about the security, and then they called the manager over and said, oi, what's going on here then? And quite rightly, the manager says something along the lines of, we're a bank.
Private bank. They're a private bank.
What are you doing? You know, essentially like, mind your own business.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you would do if a couple of policemen turned up and said, oi, what? It's like they've just wandered into somewhere. They're going, oh, I don't like the looks of this place. What happens here then? And they go, what's going on? And he says, we're a private business. Please mind your own, etc., etc. And he goes off and and one of the characters says, I quite liked him. And Roberts goes, I thought he was a cunt.
That's right. He does say
right,
that.
I'm done. I'm done with it. This is ludicrous.
Would it surprise you to know that later on that bank got robbed? I know.
What?
I know. Surprises abound.
I can't.
So yeah, I mean, look, I knew you would only watch the first 20 minutes, and I thought, well, do you know what? Sometimes you enjoy these films. I mean, Taken,
I would
for example.
absolutely love to have watched it and gone, you know what? This isn't what I thought it would
great.
be.
Yeah, exactly.
Or this is heightened to such a degree. But like you say, I think it's the contradiction of Nick Love. He wants to be Michael Mann or Scorsese or something, and he just doesn't really.
He just doesn't get it. No.
I mean, I'd quite like. I don't know if he wrote it. Did he write this?
Oh, I have no idea. I didn't see.
Nick Love. I mean, his films are of a genre of their own. I think 'cause he did stuff like Outlaw, which has if you haven't seen it yet, there's a great video on YouTube of the highlights of him and Danny Dyer's commentary on Outlaw, and it's just abysmal. But I think Nick Love's the kind of guy I'd love to see him make a film written by someone who really knew their chops and someone who the studio would say, "You're right, you make the film that's written." Because visually,
he can direct.
Some of it, looked absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Have they got an office in the Gherkin or something?
Well, they have. That was another problem with it. Like I say, with these police officers who seemingly have offices in the Gherkin, they use like big, massive 27-inch IMAX, 2 of them on their desk, and then they go home to their like penthouse apartments, and you're just like, you can't, like you said, you can't have it both ways, where you're going for this kind of gritty realness, but then going, these guys just earn millions of pounds, and it's just. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the guy can put a sequence together. He can shoot. Yeah. He can shoot a car chase, and he's got all that. I mean, I think his problem is just that he just needs to let it go. He needs to go and try something a bit different, and maybe then stretch himself. Well, I think that as well. So yeah, unfortunately, I wouldn't recommend it. I'd suggest. You either brave the cold weather like I should have done and go and see Zero Dark 30 instead, or just put Taken on. But there's only or The Grey. There's plenty of other great films out there that will fill 2 hours, and not leave you wanting to pound your own head against the wall. Unfortunately, The Sweeney is not one of them. Okay, so that's our slightly shorter than usual podcast. Not sure if it's shorter than usual, less films than usual, whatever. We'll be back in episode 21. Hopefully, I think with Wreck-It Ralph. I think so. Maybe with Flight. That's in 2 weeks' time, and we'll also cover Zero Dark 30. Thank you very much for listening, and don't forget to like us at the Guernsey Film info page, and also 24 LPS on the YouTube and the Twitters. Good night.